All right, what's up, guys? Welcome to Pork Fest. Here, Free State Live podcast. I'm here with Tom Mannion, State Representative and Free Stater and veteran. My name's Proulx. I'm a native to the state of New Hampshire, veteran of the New Hampshire Army National Guard, and wear a whole bunch of hats doing political activism. Tom and I, we met just, doing Free State stuff, doing activist stuff together.
Yep.
I think we're
So I'm not a native. I was a mover in 2020. Lockdowns did it for me. I was kind of one of those guys that was just like sitting in Massachusetts and kept kicking the can, where I was like, oh, I'll move someday. I know I'm moving to New Hampshire. I swear to God, I'm moving to New Hampshire. And then a 2-year plan became 4-year plan, became like 7-year plan, honestly. And then lockdowns hit, and that was it. That was the spark that got me here, and not only here, but made me decide to run for the state legislature to make sure that the lockdowns could never happen again. So,
well, thank you for coming.
Yeah.
I always say, I'm forever grateful for the Free State Project for choosing my home of New Hampshire, and forever grateful for all the Free Staters who move here. Mm-hmm. Just made my life that much easier. I don't have to move anywhere. Yeah. So, the saying is the smart libertarians move to New Hampshire and the lucky ones are born here. Yeah. So I'm grateful that I'm lucky, and thank you for being smart, Tom.
Yeah.
So you're in the Marine Corps, right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's actually, so that's actually how I figured out I was a libertarian. It's one of those things, like, I didn't really have a political affiliation. So, I joined kind of right out of high school, right? So, like, in high school, I was kind of aimless, didn't know what I was going to do. I was like, oh, maybe I'll do, like, video games or software or whatever. And then 9/11 hit, like, my sophomore year. And I was, like, one of those guys, I was just like, everybody was, like, shocked. Like, holy crap, how do I go, like, I want to do something about this immediately. I'm one of those guys, like, a tragedy occurs and I want to go do something about it. So I that following summer, like, I was, going to, like, air shows and all the patriotic rah-rah stuff, like, and we're all about it, right? At the time, a recruiter snatched me up and he was like, oh, I'll put you in the delayed entry program. So I was like, I guess you can call it grooming, some would say. It's in high school. And the recruiters, I'm 16, 17. I have to have my parents sign off on the form to agree that I'm going to go to this delayed entry program. I have, like, a boot camp date that's, like, set out 2 years in the future. And, before I know it, it's like, I enlisted to go find bin Laden, right? Like, Bin Laden's the bad guy. He's in Afghanistan. I was like, oh, that's where I'm going to go do. Fast forward 2005, I found myself on my first deployment in Iraq. And I wasn't a political junkie. I didn't really follow the news that much. I understood that we were in Iraq, but in my brain, I was like, oh, that Gulf War thing, that was over in like a week, like we had, bombed the crap out of Saddam. He, stopped doing whatever the hell he was doing. And, we pulled right out of there, but that's not what we were doing. So, like, I find myself in Iraq, not really sure why I'm there. We're at, like, the Syrian border. I was doing, like, door-to-door clearing missions. That was, like, our whole thing. It was messed up because, like, there's a lot of, like, you look at these things, like the police with, like, no-knock raids in the United States. They're doing these things. They just, like, bust in on, like, these unsuspecting people. Now imagine that, like, across the entire city, like an entire city, like with, like, thousands and thousands of Marines just door kicking in, and there's just, like, terrified families in there, and it's just, I understand why that area of the world, like, looks, upon us poorly. So when I got home, and I started going to school on the GI Bill after I went to 2 deployments, but in 2008 I went to school on the GI Bill, and I started, like, researching presidential candidates because I wanted to get more involved. Like, the 2008 election was coming up, and I had missed the boat on the Ron Paul revolution because the first one. The primaries were over, the candidates were set, and so I'm like, but I'm reading about this guy, Ron Paul, like, he was one of the few people to question, like, the Iraq war when it was unpopular for his party at the time, right? Like, the Republicans were all in on this weapons of mass destruction, and then over half the Dems are all in this weapons of mass destruction narrative. And they call him a traitor and a terrorist sympathizer and all that stuff. And, like, that's how I became a libertarian. That's how I would describe it. It's strictly from an anti-war perspective. That's how it started. And then it's like all these other things, like, oh, these victimless crimes. Like, oh, I agree or eat. Like, people should not be going to jail for, marijuana or whatever. It's like, this is absurd. And like, thankfully the culture over the last 10, 15 years since then, like the marijuana thing's like, it's legal in a lot of places, not here. We're trying. I swear to God, we're trying. We'll get it. But yeah.
I mean, my road to liberty was through the military as well. I joined at 17 too, right? I mean,
they're grooming us, man.
Yeah, grooming, I guess, maybe. Joined at 17. Definitely like massive sense of patriotism. We're gonna go fight the bad guys. Rah. All great, good intentions, right? I grew up just, very typical conservative. I don't know, didn't really have too much of a perspective on foreign policy. I didn't know why some people thought Bush was a bad guy. I was a Trump supporter. And then in 2019, I was in Eastern Europe. I never went on combat deployments, but we did do a stint in Eastern Europe, Slovenia, Hungary, and Romania. And we were in Hungary, and I was artillery and rocket artillery, the HIMARS, those things that we just sent a boatload to Ukraine. And it's a 3-man crew, and basically we kind of like live in those things for days or perhaps weeks. And military, we do this thing called hurry up and wait, where it's like maybe hours or days waiting for something to happen, and then big order comes down the pipeline. Everyone's got to rush around and get stuff done, and then you go back to waiting again. So we're doing that hurry up and wait stuff, just scrolling through social media, waiting for that comms alarm to go off for a fire mission to come down. And I came across a story from The Intercept. It was the drone papers talking about Daniel Hale, the whistleblower, Airman Daniel Hale. And it said 90% of drone strikes were on innocent civilians.
The wrong target.
Yeah, wrong target.
Yeah.
And being
collateral damage, they call it.
Right. Yeah, collateral. 90% collateral. Being artillery, we're getting a lot of the same intel, drone pilots, artillery, forward observers are sending that back and forth between drone pilots and just general artillerymen. And so that deeply bothered me, being artillery, being the guy who presses that button and sends a rocket downrange, and being told that 90% of the time I'm going to be killing an innocent person. I joined the military to protect the innocent, right? To protect the innocent, defenseless, go get the bad guys. Yeah. And it's I don't know if you've seen that skit. It's like, Hans, are we the baddies?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
It kind of was like that moment. I was like, whoa. So I started, digging deep into, the whole reasons why we were over there, some of the bad stuff, right? Yeah, the midnight knock raids, pulling these people out of their beds.
Yep, terrified people.
And especially going to the culture of the Middle East. It's a very high honor society. Yep. And we're pulling these people in the middle of the night right in front of their wives. And I don't think I would be happy. There was a really good Ron Paul commercial that I saw, and I was too young for the Ron Paul days, but I always remember seeing that commercial. I was like, what if there was a Chinese or Russian base in the middle of Texas? Yep. And same stuff that we were doing overseas, but yeah, that's what we were doing. And it kind of made sense, why these people were aggressive with us, and especially these people in the Middle East live in abject poverty. Most of them don't know how to read and write. They don't know what a New York City is or 9/11 is. Yeah. And we just going over there and doing all this stuff to them. We were kind of creating our own enemies by doing that. Yeah. So just reading into that stuff, came across a little bit of Ron Paul, a little bit of Scott Horton, and then really that final push over that hill into libertarianism for me was COVID, just especially being in the military and in the National Guard, because the National Guard were full-time activated for a year and a half to go take care of the COVID crisis, and then of course the vaccine mandates came around, and being told that I would be essentially a felon. I was, if you don't get the shot, you're getting a dishonorable discharge.
Yeah.
I already
like people like you hear that in media and stuff like that. That's a real big deal. That follows you around forever.
Yeah. You can't have a firearm if you have a dishonorable. It's almost like a felony charge.
Yeah.
And I already had my doubts about the vaccine, and just having that come down, and knowing that my government was lying to me, not only in this current crisis, but in the previous crisis, the wars in the Middle East and terrorism.
It makes you wonder how far back they've been lying.
Yeah, exactly. And just sent me right over that cliff, straight into the Free State Project. Being born in New Hampshire, I had always known about the Free State Project. I actually grew up in Bristol, which is about 2 towns over from Grafton. The whole Freetown Project, Libertarian walks into a bear, all that nonsense.
You didn't get mauled by any bears or anything?
I don't think so. No. But I wasn't Libertarian at the time, so
that's true. Yeah. You got a shield.
And I knew about the Free State Project. The only thing that I knew is that it was a migration movement to come to New Hampshire, and I was like, great, more massholes coming in.
Like me?
Yeah, like you. I was like, great, more people from out of state coming to New Hampshire to change our state. And then, of course, once I took that deep dive into liberty, I found out that the Free Staters were actually the reinforcements to protect us from the massholes.
To counterbalance the shift. I think it's great.
So, and like you were saying, saw something was going on, you had to get involved and help out. That's like a personal philosophy of mine was, I don't have a right to complain about something unless I'm willing to do something about it. And just seeing the lies coming from government, the destruction that we're causing, not only in the United States, but across the world, just deeply unhappy with the current state of our government, the COVID crisis, way everything was going with that, had to get involved. And, now I would call Free Staters family. Like, the whole Free State Project has become like a big family to me. Don't always agree with all your family members, that's for sure.
That happens, though.
But I think like we're all on the same mission, liberty in our lifetime, that thing. And Free State Project, we're all getting together. Also, we're here at Pork Fest, which I call family reunion time. So we're all getting together, hanging out, drinking beers, telling shitty jokes, and watching really intelligent speakers, like the guy who helped me become a libertarian, Scott Horton.
Oh yeah.
We just came from a Matt Kibbe talking about socialism and wine, and some of the things going on in Georgia, which Scott Horton also was talking about because of our interventions in Georgia. So, it's all connected into a circle.
It's like we wonder, like our foreign policies, like we wonder why all these areas of the world hate us. And like that whole like Bush regime of George W. too, where he's just like, oh, they hate us because of our freedom. And it's just like Ron Paul is one of those guys that like was crucified by even like Fox News and stuff for questioning. It's like, no, 9/11 happened for a reason. And we probably like what they did was awful, but it wasn't unprovoked. Like we saw this coming. And it was completely like we screwed around and we found out, and it's awful that it happened, obviously, but it's just one of those things. Like Ron Paul was just crucified for speaking what we knew is true, like what we know is true now, and we're seeing like we're still doing the same thing even to this day. Like it's like the Ukraine war is going to be the same thing. We're antagonizing like China with Taiwan. It's the same thing there. Like Syria, we still have bases in Syria guarding oil fields that, for large oil companies. It's just ridiculous.
Yeah, it is ridiculous. Yeah. And it's crazy the lies and how backwards everything is. Like part of my research into figuring out and into my exploration into liberty, coming to find out, right. Everyone's like, Al-Qaeda's the bad guys. We're going to go get Al-Qaeda, right? Bin Laden's part of this Al-Qaeda group. We're going to go fight Al-Qaeda. Turns out Al-Qaeda's like our allies in a few different countries that we're fighting in, right? Al-Qaeda groups are our allies in Syria that we're using to fight against the al-Assad regime and Yemen with the Saudi war against the Houthis. We use Al-Qaeda groups in Libya.
To get Gaddafi.
It's crazy. And then like one of the movies that I was like, I don't know, maybe a little. It was like one of those movies that always got me, like in the feels, was Black Hawk Down.
Oh yeah,
right?
yeah.
In Mogadishu.
Yeah.
I constantly watched that movie and I was like, wow, what hell on earth type thing.
And for what?
Yeah, exactly. For what?
For what?
And we're still there.
We're still there.
That was 93.
Yeah.
It's 2023.
Yeah.
It's 30 years of intermittent conflict in Somalia. It's crazy.
Oh, yeah. Still drone striking.
Yeah.
It's probably the wrong targets, 9 times out of 10. Probably
Yeah.
the wrong targets. So actually, so you were mentioning earlier about like your guard service. Like we should probably segue into the Defend the Guard stuff, right? So you were mentioning
the T-shirt Defend the Guard.
Yeah. So when I was in on my first deployment, Katrina hit. It was 2005, fall 2005. Katrina hits New Orleans. One of the guys in my squad, he was from New Orleans, and he was raised by his grandmother. There's a rule in the military thing where like they won't let you home unless it's like a death of a direct relative, like a mother or father or brother, sister, or child, a grandmother or something like that. Even if it's an emergency, they're not going to send you home from your combat deployment. I'm sure if you begged and maybe got a hold of your congressman, they would let you do it. But I mean, what we ended up doing is we let this guy borrow the sat phone that we had, which was like our lifeline back home, just keeping in touch with our family. And we let him borrow it because like his grandmother raised him, and she was in New Orleans, and she was like, stranded. So he was calling his neighbors to get her out of the town. And come to find out, like years later, I find out that the New Orleans National Guard was not there during Katrina because they were in Iraq building dams. And they just were not available. They had to. I know. And then afterwards, I was hearing about because like active duty Marine guys, infantry battalions were being sent from Camp Lejeune, North Carolina, down to do like humanitarian efforts down in New Orleans. This is not the job of an infantry battalion. I've heard of like dark stories where like they were clearing buildings and stuff like that, and I think they did a temporary gun confiscation, stuff like that,
yeah.
because the Marine guys that you're sending down there are trained to do like a city clearing like I was doing. They're not there to do like community aid. That's not what they're there for. That's not what they're trained for. So
yeah. So yeah, the Defend the Guard thing, which it's like I guess I just roll through the history of this.
Yeah.
I guess.
Yeah.
I came across Sergeant Dan McKnight. He was active Marine, then switched over to active Army, and then he was Idaho Army National Guard. And he had to lead a convoy to Katrina, to Louisiana for Katrina relief. And when he got there, he also noticed the Louisiana Guard was missing, which comes into like really huge problems because, guardsmen, like there aren't like this like thing that's away from the public view. Like guardsmen are citizen soldiers. They're part of the community. They're your firefighters, police, nurses, doctors, teachers, and just regular people that there's part of the community, and they know the community best. And when they're not there, especially for a crisis like Katrina, that's where you get people getting a little froggy and start doing like the gun confiscations because that's what they're trained to do. As opposed to a Louisiana National Guardsman, they know their neighbors, they know the culture of the environment. They're able to de-escalate probably a lot better than anyone else who's like going to this thing and maybe feeling a little bit that they're in.
It's almost like a foreign deployment,
yeah,
right?
Exactly.
There's like boys from Ohio and stuff like that are stationed in Camp Lejeune are being shipped down to Louisiana, and they're in the mindset of like I'm going to a city, like I'm going to Baghdad or I'm going to like Fallujah, and they're now in New Orleans and they're like, wait, I got to completely switch my brain from that. I just got back from 29 Palms doing like combat MOUT training, like missions oriented and urban terrain training. It's like, but no, now we got to do this rescue mission because there's no National Guard available.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, like you said, going to a foreign country, like even like Florida is like almost a completely different place than New York City, right? Completely different culture, different climates, the whole 9 yards. Texas is completely different place than California. Even states right next to each other, New Hampshire and Massachusetts, it seems like you're going into a different country sometimes. The culture is so different. The rules are so different. the way that people conduct themselves are so different. So yeah, when you've got these guys who are essentially going into a different country after they just go through all these combat training programs, of course they're going to get a little froggy. And so the people that would have been best to handle that situation, they weren't there. And the motto of the Guard is always ready, always there. And guess who wasn't there? So Dan McKnight, he did that convoy down there, and that got the cogs in his brain turning, and he was like, troops shouldn't be overseas for the reasons that we said. A bunch of lies, and especially our National Guard shouldn't be over there. So he started an organization, Bring Our Troops Home, and he wanted to go to D.C. And lobby every member of Congress and ask them to bring our troops home. He got laughed at pretty much the whole way through. Liz Cheney told him, "We're never leaving Afghanistan. We'll be there forever." So just like hitting that brick wall, pretty much getting laughed at by all of Congress, you have to start thinking outside the box, since that's where he came up with Defend the Guard. And so Defend the Guard would prevent the state's National Guard, it's passed at the state level, prevent the state's National Guard from being deployed to overseas combat unless Congress declares war through the constitutional process laid out in Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11.
Which they haven't done since 1942.
Yeah. Since World War II. Haven't done it since. And that kind of like goes into like the whole, free state. What we're trying to do is we see that there's no national solution, right? There's nothing getting done in D.C. There's no national solution through what we might consider the proper channels. So we got to bring it to the states. And so, we're bringing it to the states. We're bringing Defend the Guard. At least for the, would love to be able to bring all the troops home. Active reserves. But at least with the National Guard, the state has at least some control over them. So that's the avenue that we're trying to approach with that. And I met Tom at New Hampshire Liberty Alliance. It was like a preparation session for the upcoming legislative season. We were just kind of going over what to be expected from the budget battle and some other important bills that we would be discussing and starting to look at. And I made a really quick presentation trying to look for sponsors for Defend the Guard, because I wanted an all-veteran team, because that would make the bill look best. It doesn't make much sense for a veterans issue bill to be sponsored by people who aren't veterans. And that's where I met Tom, and that's where we become like awesome teammates here.
That was great. Like the rest of the, so we have John Patuchik's a vet, Granger's a vet, and myself, and so Adjutant was the Democrat on the bill. He actually had to step down because of like a medical issue from his work, but he was the Democrat making it a bipartisan bill. That Josh Adjutant. It was like the 10-year anniversary, the beginning of the Iraq War, on the House floor, did this amazing unanimous consent speech where all he did, he just read the names of all of the fallen New Hampshire, the Granite Staters that have died in the course of the Iraq War, and it's like that thing touched me. Like just reading the names, it's one of those like memorial things that I still think about, and it still gives me chills. I was just like, holy crap! It's like that is super super powerful. It's a real shame he had to step down. I hope if he comes back, he seems to be he'd be a force. I'm not like one of those guys that just only roots for my team. Like when there's good dudes on the other side, I'm willing to work with them. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm not a party man myself. Yeah. I want Liberty to win, and these Democrats, right, really hardcore progressives and everything. I think they're well-intentioned. We might disagree on strategy on how to achieve these goals of essentially like human flourishing and people being safe and happy. We disagree on strategies, right? They want more government to achieve those ends, and we want less. But there are so many single-issue coalitions that we can come together on. A lot of war. A lot of the really hardcore progressive Democrats, they're our strongest allies when it comes to the war measure. I mean, Ron Paul's greatest ally was Dennis Kucinich, Democrat, right? Real shame, Josh Adjutant. It's like, I actually hope he recovers and he comes back, is reelected. I mean,
I'm sure my leadership team doesn't like that. Yeah, I'm not going to come back, but it's fine.
Yeah, and you know, we've had some other Democrat state reps reach out. You know, I've reached out to them. They've reached out to me. Even some of them have come to PorcFest here to check things out because apparently, you know, disagreements among the Democrat Party. I know, like, the leadership wants to have a really straight, narrow, top-down approach. Wants people to follow that party line. You know, the Republicans don't necessarily have that issue as much, but it's really evident with the Democrat Party. So when you have some Democrat state reps that want to break away, it really upsets that Democrat Party leadership. But then when they become more polarized from their leadership, they start interacting with you know, the Liberty side, where we agree on a lot of things already. We're just, you know, different party lines and everything like that, or, like I said, different strategies. So they, like, Democrat state reps, they want to come see this dystopian nightmare that is PorcFest. I say that as I see, you know, children playing in the playground, dogs walking around, people just having a good and peaceful time. Like, almost everyone's armed. It was really funny. So, you know, we did have a situation last night, and we had to have an aggressor, right? You know, we believe in the non-aggression principle, and we don't believe in aggression and everything like that. And we had an aggressor enter our event here, and needed to be removed. So, you know, we, you know, did our thing and made sure that the law enforcement would come and take care of the situation. And law enforcement needed to borrow a knife for a brief second, and he asked, "Does anyone have a knife?" And there were about like 10 people there. He goes, "Does someone have a knife?" Everyone raised their hand and said yes. It was like a classic PorcFest moment. You know, but they just goes to show, you know, we're a very peaceful community. We don't accept people coming here to create violence. And we all work together to make sure that we have a safe environment here at PorcFest. Nothing bad happens.
This is my first time, and I think I'm going to survive it. Yeah. I think
it's not a dystopian nightmare.
No, I think I'll make it till Sunday.
No, so I mean, like, there's tons of ways that we can work with our allies across the aisle. I mean, I say across the aisle. I'm undeclared.
You're undeclared. For me, like, from my perspective, I would love, like, if we can. The problem is, we can talk about the issues, right? Like, the problems that we're running into at the State House is the Adjutant General of the New Hampshire National Guard. You know, he's going to get some of his marching orders because he has a dual mission from D.C., from Pentagon specifically, and they are pushing hard against this bill. The structure of the New Hampshire, so we have our DMARS is what it's called, is the Department of Military Affairs and Veteran Services. That's like one big umbrella for everything. Veteran Services only recently in the last 5 years was kind of put underneath the Department of Military Affairs. I'm still looking into this, trying to figure out the history on why, because the Veteran Services used to be more akin to like Health and Human Services, because it's more like treating like elderly at the VA, at the veteran homes and stuff like that. I don't know why it was put under the VA or under the Department of Military Affairs. And now the up in that group is underneath the Adjutant General is it's the Veterans Advisory Council. They are like one of the organizations that my committee listens to more than any other. They take their advisement to heart because we are the Veterans Advisory Committee. Like, that's what we're there for. We're there to help veterans. And this Veterans Advisory Committee has not endorsed Defend the Guard. And my theory is that the Adjutant General's office walked in there, put their thumbs on the scales, and told them, we're going to lose money if this Defend the Guard passes. Like, we're going to lose money for the National Guard, federal money, if this passes. And that they're like, oh, okay, then we're against it. That doesn't I guarantee they didn't explain what the bill was supposed to do, like what's behind it or anything. I'm still researching the background behind it, but there has not been a veteran that I've met across asking any, not just from New Hampshire, anywhere, that is against this bill. Like, I've spoken at my VFW, I've spoken at the Nashua American Legion. Lots of people seem super engaged and they're really interested into this. Like, we're suffering through, like, we're moving into the third decade of just like never-ending war in my lifetime, and it's just, like, these old dudes are recognizing, like, holy crap, this is never going to end. Like, some of these guys went through Vietnam, like 10 years of war, you know, and most of them were just like happy that ended. So it's like, it's hard to find, it's impossible to find a veteran that is against this. The only people that are against it are the establishment types that are getting marching orders from the Pentagon. So that's where we're at. Like, the committee currently has it retained, and we're trying, like, I need to figure out what's going on with the Veterans Services Committee, or the Veterans Advisory Council, sorry. The Veterans Advisory Council, I would like to meet with them and just at least understand what they were told, and then get them to back off that, non-endorse. Just, all they have to do is just not take a position. And that'd be great. If they can do that, then I think it'll sail out of my committee with an ought to pass recommendation.
Yeah. Yeah, it is that huge conflict of interest having essentially our version somewhat of the VA being under essentially the Pentagon, right? Because the orders fall down through the tags office.
Yep. Because if that happened at the federal level, everything awful that happened from all the wars that the VA was exposing, like for example, like Agent Orange, like anything like that, or the burn pits in Iraq and Afghanistan, like, oh, holy crap, this is like awful. This is something we put all our guys through. If that had to be exposed via the Secretary of Defense's office, it'd never see the light of day. It would get buried with all of the failed audits that the Pentagon just has never passed.
Would you say something like an abused wife being attached to?
It's similar to like an abused wife who's trying to leave her husband but has to ask him for the money to do so. That's basically what I'm talking about. Like an abused veteran's like, oh well, Mr. Department of Defense, can I have some money for my treatment? Even though they're the one who gave him the black eye, right. You know.
Yeah. So yeah, it's in the State Federal and Veterans Affairs Committee, chaired by Representative Mike Moffitt. I actually really like Moffitt. I think he's a really good dude. He's a Marine Corps veteran. He understands. Every time I go make a presentation and he happens to be there, he makes a point. He was like, just so everyone knows, the last time we constitutionally declared war was 1942.
So he understands the premise.
He understands it really well. And the last time I spoke at the Merrimack County GOP committee, he was there and he stood up and he said it's been opposed by the Veterans Advisory Committee, who is essentially the establishment. Yeah. He said those words. He called them the establishment.
There are representatives from our federal delegation on there, like Chris Pappas and Custer. They have their own reps that are on that council as well. So they're supposed to be speaking out on behalf of veterans, but they could be just speaking just one more vote in favor of Lockheed Martin, instead of the veterans.
Jeez.
So it's just to me it's a big. I think it's a conflict of interest on this specific bill. Like, they're really great on all the other, like, everything that has to do with like veterans health and mental services, stuff like that. Like, they're really good. They're great on those. Like, they endorse all those bills. But it's like this one is like so specifically like anti-Department of Defense, and you can see that by their recommendation to go against it, they're literally spitting in the face, in my opinion, of veterans and active duty servicemen. For what? Money? For jets? Like what? Like. Even if the threat were true, like we're going to lose $400 million, and that $400 million was like something in addition to the money that they'd spend on the deployment itself, making it a net zero if it got lost. Even if it was that, they're basically saying we value this $400 million more than the lives of the National Guardsmen. Yeah. And so one of the things that I plan on doing this fall, we're going to have another public hearing in September or October. If you follow me on Mannion 4NH on Twitter, or Derek Proulx,
it's Derek DEREK_PROULX on Twitter.
Yep. If you follow either of us on Twitter, we're going to retweet the crap out of it as soon as I get a date for this public hearing. I would love for any veterans, even if you're not a veteran, you have family that are veterans, or if you just really care about this issue, to make your way up to Concord, because Moffitt wants to do another public hearing, and he says he's going to go as long as it takes. Like, he'll be there like till midnight if we have to, and to hear everyone who wants to speak. And what we need to do is show them the massive grassroots support behind this thing, because when we have like 30, 40, 50, 60 people show up, and then they just got like two dudes representing the establishment, and their talking points are money, and I ask every person if they value money over the lives of the guardsmen, like, I think that's going to be a big selling point. So the more people we have, the better.
Yeah, I mean, like, ultimately, it's like how much is the life of a National Guardsman? I mean, that's a really good question to ask.
Yeah.
If we're worried about them pulling, subsidy money from the New Hampshire Guard, okay, how much is the life of a guardsman?
Yeah, is it worth $400 million? Right. Or how many guardsmen can you buy for $400 million? Right. Is that the trade we're gonna do? Like,
so Moffett, again, he's just really concerned about voting against the Veterans Advisory Committee.
Yep.
I think he's starting to understand that those concerns are somewhat unfounded.
Yeah.
Especially as we start building up a lot of this grassroots support, right? Going to American Legions and VFWs and getting that word out, getting the New Hampshire ACLU on board, getting New Hampshire Peace Action on board, run by Will Hawkins. He showed up to our first first round of testimony before I got retained. He was fantastic, and he actually approached it from a totally he's more of a progressive, and he approached it from like a totally different, out of left field direction. Caught me off guard, and something I never thought about. Talking about how it's not only that we're violating Article 1, Section 8, but we're also violating Article 6 of the United States Constitution.
The treaties.
Dealing with international treaties that we've ratified in the United States. I think it's Article 2 of United Nations resolutions. A United Nations member can't invade another. Iraq is a United Nations member. And the United States is a United Nations member. But it's not a war. We're not really invading them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's just it's an authorization for use of military force is what it is. And
what a sham that is.
Yeah.
Just briefly talk on, okay, so we want Congress to do its job and declare war before we send our National Guardsmen overseas. Okay. Well, isn't an AUMF authorization for the use of military force, isn't that a war declaration?
Nope.
Not quite, because that kind of, the AUMF flips the head on the whole constitutional process, because it is literally Congress abdicating its constitutional responsibilities and just telling the president, oh, for the end, until the end of time, you may now go to war wherever you want to, with whomever you want to, whenever you want to.
It would be akin to like the president being able to rule something unconstitutional, like stealing that power from the Supreme Court, or the Supreme Court confirming other justices. Like it's one of those, like, the reasons that we have this separation of powers is because the founders knew that the executive branch is the most likely to want war. So the power to declare it should remain with the people in the legislature. And like the fact that these AOMFs exist basically say, the president, you can do whatever you want. You can start this. You can not start it. You do whatever you want. We'll just print the checks. Like you can go anywhere you want. In the 2001 AUMF, like the list of countries that we've invaded or drone striked is huge. It's like in the dozens, almost 24, I think, countries have been blanketed under this 2001 AUMF. They've tried to vote it down, repeal it, and it just dies. I think it got 10 votes in the Senate this term. Rand Paul tried to repeal the 2001 AUMF, 10 votes to repeal it. So this is never going to end at the federal level.
Yeah, it really is. Well, I mean, Congress does not have any authority to yield its constitutional responsibilities. If you want to yield your constitutional responsibilities, guess what? You're going to have to pass a constitutional amendment that gets rid of that Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11 part of the Constitution, right? You need a constitutional amendment if you want to, operate our foreign policy in this way. Of course they don't want to get rid of it.
Of course.
They don't shoulder the blame anymore. It goes to the president. He's the one who's going to war with people, not Congress.
When your sons or daughters come home in a box, you blame the president. You don't blame Congress, because they didn't actually declare anything. Yeah. They just said, "Oh well, the president did it." That's what they say. I didn't know he was going to invade Iraq. I just said that he could.
Yeah. Yeah, dude. And that just, that the whole not following that the constitutional process has just completely corrupted our country to its core.
Yeah.
Through the Patriot Act and all that stuff, and then also 90% drone strikes, using our enemies and allies in different countries however we see fit. Essentially, just wherever we can line the pockets of the defense contractors, BAE. That's where we're gonna do it.
I think that's the drive behind all of this. It's just like as soon as it's kind of forking, but it's like as soon as Afghanistan ended, it's like, oh well, we're going to amp up in Ukraine. So it's just like, so Lockheed Martin doesn't miss a payday. Like they're just going to keep making missiles and stuff forever. It's going to be the same deal. It's like and if Ukraine fizzles out, they're going to find a new conflict on behalf of these defense contractors, and they're going to send our guardsmen there because they make up 40% of our deployed forces, and we're going to lose more dudes. Like it's absolutely insane that this is like the foreign policy of the United States is just taking taxpayer money, handing it to handing it to the defense contractors, sometimes via Ukraine, and the one thing is like with the Ukraine situation, we're not. Our boys aren't coming home in boxes, but eventually this is going to end. And they're going to need a new conflict. And then they're going to just send our guys. Whether it's like amp up in Syria, if like a McCain type gets in the White House, God forbid, we could go into Iran. Like who the hell knows?
A lot of candidates are talking about invading Mexico to deal with cartels.
Oh my God. That's so true.
Another problem of our own making, right? Through the Iran-Contras and fueling the drug wars and all that stuff. A problem of our own making. And now we have to go solve that. It's like, the Dave Smith, if you want to know who America's next enemy is, look at who we're funding right now, that thing. I mean, another thing that I'm really scared of is you have a lot of these, foreign legions going into Ukraine to go fight for the Ukrainian military. You're getting a lot of people who are on the extreme side of politics, really aggressive and extreme people, especially in Europe, where Europe does have a very, very real migrant crisis that is really upsetting a lot of people. The migrant crisis started by the United States because of our conflicts in the Middle East. Imagine that. And so now we're funding all these very aggressive, militant, very radical groups that are getting all this training, combat experience, equipment in Ukraine. Where are they going to go once the war is over? Back to their own countries. And
this worked really well when we did it in Afghanistan. Like when we gave all those militants a whole bunch of weapons, and then 20 years later they were using them on us.
Yeah, to go fight the Russians.
We had like a 1-year turnaround in Syria where we armed a bunch of rebels, and then they went and joined ISIS. That was like a 1-year turnaround. That was like a hyper speed United States policy.
It just goes back to like we created this problem with the cartels. We gave them all the weapons and the money that they needed to become a problem, and now they're a big problem, and now we're going to go solve it by more weapons and more, throwing more money at the problem. Just all this nonsense. Just the midnight no-knock raids. The truth comes to light. All this stuff comes out eventually, and especially when a veteran realizes the awfulness in the world that has been perpetrated by the United States government and all of its cronies, it messes with us. It really does, and especially when you've been in the shit. I wasn't in combat, but I know plenty of people who were. Good battle buddy of mine. He was in Afghanistan, and the bachabazi, the Afghan child rape culture. The Taliban outlawed that practice, but we were protecting the Afghan government, who was still accepting it. And we were told don't mess with any Afghan soldier committing the act of bachabazi. That's their culture, and he had to watch this Afghan soldier rape this little boy, and then a few days later, this was a big story. An Afghan, teenage boy, he picked up an AK-47 and he shot 3 Marines. And they actually ended up catching him, and putting him into custody. And he said he did it because you were protecting my abuser. And so you hear all these stories, and a lot of people wonder why veteran suicide is such a big problem, and it becomes so apparent when you realize some the atrocities that have been committed across the globe in the name of which sucks.
You joined for patriotism. They exploited my patriotism.
Yeah, I am such a hardcore patriot.
Yeah.
And so many other people are, and they exploited that to commit these crimes.
Yeah, and I think it's once you realize, it's like, holy crap. I was duped, I was lied to, and then like you just feel like, to me, like it made me angry. But some dudes are gonna feel depressed, and they're gonna go into a dark place. Like to me, I got angry and motivated, and like just that's like how it was a political awakening. But some people don't see a way out. They don't find Ron Paul.
Yeah, we suffer. We suffer as a community. And then we have the VA, the government solution to veterans health care, and it's a numbers game, right? You go to the VA, all these VA counselors we have all this trauma that we need to deal with, and for a lot of people, the VA is the only solution to deal with that, and it's a numbers game. Like a lot of VA counselors are told, don't spend more than 15 minutes with the patient. So it's like,
it's because it's top-down, big government mismanagement, where it's like, you need to clear this many people a day. And it's just like, well, how do I do that? It's like, I don't care. You have 15 minutes each, whatever. Like, figure it out. Top-down solutions.
I've met countless former VA counselors that were fired because they cared about our veterans and they cared about their patients. And they spent more than that 15 minutes that was mandated by the VA top-down system, the bureaucracy, because they want to churn out the numbers. And every time you have to meet with a new counselor, especially when you've gone through combat and seen the horrors of war and are having to deal with these situations, you're opening wounds. You are opening wounds every single time, and people have to go back through those nightmares every single time. When you have to go, when you have the same counselor and over again, you don't have to go back that far. And just all these veterans that have to go through this process of reliving the things that keep them up at night, sometimes they take their life, and
they don't see any other way out. There's just not any opportunities for them. I mean, I want to end on a positive note though, because like one of the things, like if you can find a good community, like here at like the Free State, like this is I understand that maybe you're not a libertarian or something, but like you could agree with at least like the anti-war stance. If you feel like you were abused and that the government used you, you should reach out to us. Like veterans groups are great. They'll be fantastic too. Some of those guys, like in veterans groups, some veterans group guys like feel justified in what they did. They're like, oh, I served, I did my thing, and it's like they don't really understand the questioning of what you went through. Like, it's just like, well, were we the good guys? Like, some veterans will just shut that off. They're like, of course we were. Like they don't understand. But it's just like there are guys. There's lots of guys like me and you that's just like we're not necessarily the good guys in these conflicts. Like it's not World War II. It's not us versus the Nazis anymore. It's not that. I'm willing to admit it myself. Like I feel like my patriotism was exploited by the government. I was sent to the wrong place, and once I admitted that, I was able to move on and then improve myself. Like I found libertarianism, and I knew I was going to move to New Hampshire someday, and then it took lockdowns to make me actually do it. But I found the Free State Project, like 6-7 years ago. It just took me a damn long time to get off my ass. But that's it. If you want to reach out,
finding the community, especially amongst veterans. Ron Paul, had the highest percentage among veterans during both 2008 and 2012 elections. Veterans who've been through it, they understand, and we have a lot of veterans in our Free State, like surprising a lot, and
they're looking to get involved.
So. I mean, they feel exploited.
Yes.
A lot of people feel exploited in a lot of different ways with the government and the way that government treats people, but especially veterans when they're exploiting patriotism to commit just awful things, death and destruction across the world. It really, puts a fire in the belly. It makes you really want to get stuff done. So yeah, and again, thank you for coming to New Hampshire, Tom.
I appreciate it, man.
Making my home more free. It was awesome. You've been such an amazing partner with the legislature, with Defend the Guard, and so many other issues.
And you've been a great activist.
Thank you.
You're everywhere that I am.
Yeah.
Like I go places, you're there. So.
Yeah. So this has been, Free State Live here at PorcFest.
Yep.
Have a good night.
Yep. See ya.